We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
It seems that the Democratic Party leadership is crumbling. Joe Biden goes from embarrassment to embarrassment. It's become almost an expectation. But what of the other power players? What of Kamala Harris, the heir apparent? What of Nancy Pelosi, once a formidable force, now almost certain to be on her way out the door? William Butler Yeats wrote, "Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world." Has a party in disarray unleashed anarchy as it desperately tries to remain relevant and cling to power? Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Coming up on today's show, Kamala and Hillary get together to try to save the failing vice president. Nancy Pelosi, alone and friendless as the Capitol seeks to move on from her years at the helm. We'll also be examining the Ukraine situation and why New York considers racism a public health emergency. I'd like to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Hagerstown, Maryland on WARK 1490 AM and 98.9 FM. Thanks for being part of the team. And remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. She's been at the forefront of the Democratic Party in California or in the nation's capital for more than 30 years. And for many, she is the face of the party, Nancy Pelosi. She talks tough, she tears up documents for photo ops, and many still consider her a powerhouse in Washington, D.C. But her days appear numbered. Joining us to figure out the machinations and power plays is longtime host of this here Liberty Nation radio show and senior political analyst for LibertyNation.com, Mr. Tim Donner. Welcome back, Tim.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
So tell me, is it a certainty, as many folks suggest, that this is Pelosi's last session as Speaker of the House, or does it all depend on the midterm results?
Well, she's almost certainly out as Speaker because the Republicans are almost certain to take control of the House this year. It's more a matter, I think, at this point, Mark, of how historic the GOP takeover will be. For example, in 2010, after Barack Obama's victory in 2008. In 2010, the GOP won 64 seats in the House, flipped 64 seats in the House. Democrats flipped over 40 in 2018 in Donald Trump's midterm. And Joe Biden is wildly unpopular on top of the historic trend of the out party winning an average of more than 20 seats in the first midterm of a new president. So there's almost no scenario, given their current very slim majority, that the Democrats really, that you could foresee the Democrats maintaining control. So then ask yourself, you've been Speaker of the House twice. You've now been denuded in a bitterly balkanized political climate. There's not much to stick around for, except to see the GOP reverse everything you've tried to do, and knowing that it won't go anywhere anyway because Biden will veto everything passed by the new GOP-led Congress. So there's not much for her to stick around for.
I mean, she will be 82 this year. I believe her birthday's in March. Happy birthday for March, Nancy. And it seems to me that if the folks in her own party and her friends in the fourth estate, they're hinting that she's too old for the role anyway. So why are they not publicly saying the same thing about President Joe Biden? Why does he get a pass?
Well, they can afford to say that about Pelosi. They can't about Biden. Because for Pelosi, it's a matter of any number of people who can come in right behind her. And there's not going to be a need for a Democratic speaker because they're not going to control the House. So it'll be a minority leader. And there's not much power in the minority in the House anymore, again, in such a balkanized environment. But they can say that about Pelosi because it's pretty much going to happen. It's obvious, but they can't afford to say it, Mark, about Joe Biden because he holds a singular office as opposed to being the leader of a large body like the House of Representatives. And if they started saying he was too old, which is something that everybody can see with their own eyes, then you start with stories like even the elite media is recognizing that Joe Biden is too old to be president, and they can't afford to do that because they're the ones that put him in office.
Yeah, I think part of that too is that the replacement, as you say, would be Kamala Harris, and she is just so unpopular. It's just incredibly surprising at how incapable and unpopular she seems to be, considering all of the hype that surrounded her appointment to the
And,
vice president office.
and now it's building on itself. For example, the pileup on the interstate near Washington, D.C., where hundreds of cars were stuck for more than a day. She made an unrelated comment about how America is moving again. And she got flamed on Twitter for saying America's moving again when people are stuck on an interstate. So she can't even win for losing. She's so unappealing and so unpopular. It's like she can't say anything.
I think there will still be a lot of people who support her, and that's more comes out of tribalism. And speaking of the I-95 issue with the snow blocking everybody, a good demonstration of tribalism is the amount of people on social media who took to their phones to blame Glenn Youngkin, saying, "Where is he? What's he doing?" That you chose wrong, Virginia, without realizing that Glenn Youngkin doesn't become governor until, I believe it's January 15th.
Even the conservative columnist, so-called conservative and yet never Trump columnist Jonah Goldberg weighed in saying, well, Glenn Youngkin better take control of this if he doesn't want to get into trouble with the famously, unhappy voters of Virginia and D.C., et cetera. And then he, of course, had to reverse it because it was just a factual error. But on the other side, they're saying he's too busy. Glenn Youngkin's too busy trying to stop critical race theory when he can't even deal with stuck cars on an interstate. I mean, these people just make bigger fools of themselves each and every day, if that's even possible.
It really surprised me with Jonah Goldberg because as an author, not just as a columnist, he's very precise on his book about fascism. It was a fantastic read. It was very precise, and obviously coming from a slightly different political perspective.
Well, it shows you the problem with Twitter. You send something out without much thinking about it, and then you realize, oh, geez. And so, of course, he got flamed across the country. He just made a mistake, but that's the problem with Twitter. People tweet before they think.
And if the United States Postal Service worked well enough, we could start sending in letters. That would give us a chance to recall them before we hit the send button. Now, when others begin discussing your political demise, as they have done with Nancy Pelosi, when you yourself have made no mention of leaving, as has happened with both Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden, what do you do? What does Pelosi try and do here? Does she spend her last few months legacy building? Or does she burn down the system that's casting her aside?
She's not really going to have the choice because it all really rests on what happens in the Senate and what happens most specifically with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, the degree to which they'll go along with anything that's sent up from the House that can be passed with 50 votes plus Kamala Harris casting the tie-breaking vote. But all the rest of it needs 60 votes because of that pesky filibuster, which Chuck Schumer is now making noises about trying to get rid of again, but it won't happen. But look, let me take you back to 2018, when the Democrats recaptured control of the House in the Trump midterm election. The only reason that Pelosi managed to become Speaker again was because she agreed that she would limit her tenure to 4 years. In other words, there was a movement then to say, you're too old, you're part of the past, you're a great power broker and fundraiser, but your time has come and gone. And she said, okay. The compromise was she'd stay 4 more years. Those 4 years are up. So I think it's pretty easy for her to bail out and leave her legacy as a true, she was a powerhouse, as a deal maker, a power broker, a fundraiser, whipping her votes into shape very effectively over the years.
Time's up, Nancy Pelosi. Tim Donner, thank you ever so much.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
Now don't go anywhere. Later in the show, we'll be looking at the New York governor's racism as a public health crisis debacle. But after this short break, American anxiety over the worsening Ukraine situation. What are the facts on the ground? We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
The tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I
others.
can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.